Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Worcester Township Board of Supervisors work session for June 15th, 2022. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? My name is Rick DiLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Lou Betts, who's our vice chair. To my right is Steve Quigley, who's our third member. On the side table, we have Tommy Ryan, the township manager, on the back. And we have a gentleman from McMahon who's giving our presentation today, and I've already forgotten his name, and that's okay. But Tommy will introduce him when we get started. First and foremost, excuse me, does anybody have any informational items for the board tonight?
This evening's meeting is being video recorded for rebroadcast.
Thank you, Tommy. First item on our agenda tonight is public comment. Does anybody have any public comment for the board this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on. So this is our work session. We have one item tonight, which is a presentation on the Kriebel Mill Road closure, and it's a discussion on the status of this particular item. As my fellow board members will remember, we had a conversation about this several months ago, and this is just sort of a continuing process of discussion. We have folks here from McMahon to sort of give us, they had evaluated this area a couple of different times and are going to give us just a short overview, and then we're just going to discuss the matter a little bit and sort of see how we feel about it. So, Tommy, if you could introduce again the gentleman we have here, because as I said, I apologize, I already forgot his name.
Chad Dixon is with us, and Chad is with the Office of our Traffic Engineer, McMahon.
Perfect. So, Chad, you should have a working mic there, and my understanding is we've got just a couple of slides, and you'll take us through those, and then we'll just sort of maybe ask some questions and kick the matter around a little bit.
Sure. Good evening. Thanks for having us at your meeting this evening to discuss the Kriebel Mill Road closure. Our office back in 2008 did an initial evaluation of the road closure just to do a very preliminary assessment at that time to identify potential issues that needed to be taken into consideration if the township wanted to reopen the road at any point in time and what might be involved. It was just a very general field evaluation and a brief report that we put together. It wasn't any detailed design or structural or roadway review. So wanted to recap the findings from that report this evening, and then we can have any discussion from there that you
Sounds good.
like. So a little bit of background real quickly, since it has been some time since we did this initial evaluation back in 2008. The road closure has been in effect for a considerable amount of time now. We don't know the exact date, but when we did the evaluation back in 2008, it had already looked at that time that it had been closed for some time based on the overgrowth of vegetation around the closed section of the roadway. Kriebel Mill Road provides access to a small number of houses to the north and south. There are parallel routes, Grange Avenue, which is a state maintained roadway, and Marybrook Road, which is a township maintained roadway. So those are alternative parallel local roads that provide a north-south movement similar to what Kriebel Mill Road would if it was open. And just from a general traffic volume perspective, it seems like Grange Avenue and Marybrook Road accommodate the needs to help move local north-south traffic. We didn't do any type of detailed traffic study or safety evaluation of any of the parallel routes. So some of the findings from our 2008 evaluation kind of focus on a handful of issues. One is the pipe or culvert itself within the closed section of the road. And again, this is back in 2008, but at that time we identified that at a minimum there would have to be some significant repair work done to the existing structure to reopen it. More than likely, particularly if the road were to be widened, the entire structure would have to be replaced. We also found during that evaluation that there's some secondary storm pipes near the culvert, and those would likely have to be replaced as well. Within the closed section of roadway, there's a severe combination of horizontal and vertical geometry that if the road was open would make it a little difficult to navigate. We estimated based on our field assessment that the current alignment through the closed section could maybe safely accommodate 10 to 15 mile per hour speeds, which isn't, ideal for a public local roadway. The existing paved roadway within the closed section would likely require significant reconstruction just due to its age and not having any maintenance over a long period of time. Portions of the roadway, both within the closed section and the open section to the north, are very narrow. And if the township were to reopen the road for two-way traffic, there would likely need to be portions in those areas that would have to be widened to at least a minimum of 16 to 18 feet in width to accommodate two-way traffic. And then north of the closed section, there's another series of very sharp horizontal curves. And in the assessment that we completed back then, our opinion was that those, if you were to open it up to two-way traffic, that you would need to improve that vertical geometry through that section to the north. Back then, this is very dated now. We did do a very conceptual level cost estimate just to improve the horizontal curves north of the closed section. And we estimated back at that time that alone, this is in addition to whatever costs you would incur to repair the structure in the closed section and repair the roadway within the closed section. That alone, what we estimated 15 years ago, could cost anywhere, north of $1 million itself. So that would be much higher now, 15 years later.
Okay.
So going on to the last slide here, and we just generated these points just to potentially get some discussion going or facilitate some discussion. What are the pros and cons of potentially opening the road? The pros, it would improve north-south access for the residents who live on the road. They would no longer have to go in a circuitous pattern to go in a north-south direction to access their home. It would improve emergency access within the immediate area. And it would provide an additional access option for traffic to and from Methacton High School. If we go to the cons side of the slide, you do open it up, it is going to be more traffic. That's potentially a negative benefit for the folks who live along Cribble Mill Road. As I mentioned, with the different deficiencies that we identified, reopening the road would likely require multiple projects to improve it, to accommodate two-way traffic. And as a result, that's significant costs to do that, and the township would likely have to find outside funding sources in order to implement an opening of the roadway. So with that, I'll stop and see if you have any questions or.
Sure. So I do. I'll get started, and then everyone else can sort of jump in. From a practical element, sort of taking the economics to the side for a minute. Certainly there's a cost element to it, and I don't want to sugarcoat that, but I guess I would look at it and say, I think it was Steve who mentioned it at the time. When you look at it, there's been certainly some drainage questions and concerns and stormwater runoff issues. When you look at that particular area, my first thought is, what are your options? Let's take money out of the equation first and say, what would be the options to consider? I think we had mentioned, maybe a bike trail or something if you just wanted to make it accessible to some kind of pedestrian access for cutting through. We talked about, sort of as you said, fixing it in an as-is state, bringing it up to current. And then we also talked, I think very briefly, about sort of realigning the road, take the wiggles out of it and make it more appropriate to straight, cutting through in terms of there. So when you look at it, does it break down to logical projects? If it were your backyard, what might you do if you didn't have to worry about writing the check?
I think, your options on a real basic level, there's maybe sort of three big picture options to take a look at. One, like you said, repairing it and upgrading it more for a recreational purpose to provide bicycle and pedestrian access through the area. You would likely want to do some minimal level of improvements just to do that to make it a safe facility. The next option from there would be to improve it to a condition to provide emergency access only through the area. And the third would be to either improve it either for a one-way traffic option or two-way traffic option. Now, when you compare the emergency access option only versus opening it for all traffic, there may not, and we would have to get in to the details of it, but there may not be that big of a difference in terms of the level of improvements that you would have to do for either one of those scenarios just because of the very severe vertical and horizontal geometry through that closed section. I think the one factor that has to be, taken into account in terms of sort of a cost-benefit perspective from a general sense is, and goes back to one of the points that I made in the early part of the presentation was, this road provides north-south access. What are the alternatives, and are those alternative parallel routes serving the purpose of providing local north-south access to a point that's satisfactory to the township and the people who live within that immediate area? Because one of the trade-offs would be, if you open it to vehicular access, is that the folks that live along that road are going to have through traffic
Right.
passing by their house.
I'll turn it to you if you want to ask. And then we'll get any questions that you want to throw out on.
Lewis, I'll let the mechanic ask the questions first.
Okay. As far as the traffic that comes up and down that road off of, was it Water Street? You still have trash trucks, school buses, ambulances, fire trucks that go so far and they got to stop, turn around, back up. So if it were to be open, those same trucks and vehicles are going to still use it. Yes, they'll go through. The same amount of traffic that exists now would still go through that way. They just have to turn around and they have to back up, and I forget the name of the road they back up. So again, the cost now of fixing it now as it was 15 years ago is more because everything costs more. So now that's a big decision. But does it benefit the residents? And again, do you do a survey to the people that A, want it, don't want it? And off the Crable Mill side, and there was a resident here that said that people come down, pull that road, they back into his driveway all the time, turn around, come back up.
Right.
And there's debris, kids park there and whatever, do that sort of thing. But you got to look at it as, does it benefit the emergency school bus, fire truck, trash trucks, they all make noise and they all go through. And those services are still going to exist. It's just that they got to turn around, back up, which, more backup beepers. I'll pass it on. Do you send a survey to the residents along both sides and get a feedback, or do you get a cost analysis of fixing it, so it's a through road like it was 30 years ago.
I think it's sort of a fact-finding mission right now, Lou, to get some prices. I know you talked about before about just putting some pipes in the ground and just trying to open it up. As Rick mentioned when we first started, going over there, I believe you and I were there not at the same time, but on the same day with one of the big storms and the water coming down the creek. The big trees were getting caught there, which backs the water all the way up to that whole area. And we had a number of residents in that area, especially Mr. Cannon and the person with the pond there, as well as the other neighbors that back halfway up the street. And looking at it, it was a result of the bridge there with the pipes being closed and clogged up. Nothing could get through, and it just became a real problem. And that's just with one storm we both happened to be there on the same time, or even a day or two later. I agree with you about asking the residents over there. I think it's a situation, I'm not sure who addressed it with me regarding the fire company. I know that the bottom of the road was opened up a little bit for the fire trucks to get around there. And it's really hard for a fire truck or the trash trucks. I believe the trash trucks go up there and have to back down the road or turn into people's driveways, and that becomes a problem. I think there's something there about the length of the road, a private road with the fire apparatus. I guess some of the fire guys were saying that as far as a safety issue, not being able to maybe come in from both sides, or it's more of just a long driveway for someone's home with the way the road's set up. So at this time, it's been something that's been discussed for a while, I guess, in the township. As Rick said, if not opening the road, we talked about opening it for pedestrian traffic and bikes and things, rather than having the people go all around the block. It's a nice road. It's a nice place to put a fishing or a little park there where people can fish there somewhere. We had talked across from Meadowood at a time doing something. But we have to look at a map of private land versus township, what the township owns there before we do anything in that area. But it's something that I guess we'd been discussed years ago. The residents on one side were for it, and some of the people on the other side were against it. The safety issues, as you said, to and from the school, emergency vehicles going in and out of there. But I think the expense, we'd have to look at that as far as the amount of money, just projection, what it would cost to widen the road versus just, it seems easy to just put a couple of large culverts in there, 3 or 4 culverts, and just get one of these bridges that we buy, around a township, and just put one of those prefab things in there at $50,000 or $100,000 with the culverts over top of that. It seems like the easy answer, but it may not be the most appropriate answer based on bus traffic and weight and, fire truck usage. So it's not an easy question to answer. There's no right and wrong at this time, but I think we have some input for some of the residents over there, because they'll be, more impacted than the other people. But at the same token, we don't ask all the residents of the township every time we want to do something. It's for the betterment of the whole township, just not the people that live on that street, that it becomes a private road or private drive for those folks. So it's really looking at all the taxpayers, that money goes into the township, and how it can be used for all the residents. So.
Well, so we'll sort of tag on there is that, from my standpoint, I know one of the things we've done with the budget the last few years is keep a list of minor and major projects just in the budget, sort of as addendums on the back end. So I do think there's some value in sort of at least getting it to a stage where it's not just anecdotal that it was north of $1 million in 2008. Okay, that's like, it's okay. That's a number that's now irrelevant because it's 15 years ago. And there's also a question about, funding sources. So do we have any requirement that we have to fix it? Is there any requirement that just says, hey, you could just leave it sort of closed in perpetuity? Or, if that were the case, do we need to take a more drastic step about, condemning the road and calling it a day? I mean, at some point, there should at least be some kind of a documentation that said, hey, we've looked at it, there were 3 options, none of them were good, then we decided to do something different in terms of that. how tricky would it be, Chad, to sort of go back and revisit it a little bit? You know, I know you guys did some cost projections in 2008, to sort of see what's changed. You know, has it deteriorated? You know, certainly we've seen water cause horrific damage over the last several years, and stormwater is a huge issue. You know, has it deteriorated in a way that it's now, one option's maybe now more logical than others, saying, wow, this is much worse than it was in 2008. Here's a different tack that I would recommend. I mean, how hard a task is that from your perspective?
I mean, since it has been 15 years now, I would be a little hesitant just to apply a cost index factor to it and tell you that that's a reasonably accurate conceptual estimate of what something might cost at this point. You know, the one thought that we had that we could do and work with staff on is sort of come up with a menu of things that you can take a look at just from a conceptual perspective, both in terms of what the big picture design might look like for different options, and then a cost associated with that. That helps you make a little bit better decision in terms of what options you may think are viable and not viable. And then, you know, once you have that information, that can allow you to plan budgetarily what you might want to pursue in a more detailed manner. So from the discussion I heard tonight, it sounds like there's some different options that you might want to consider. One is, what would it cost to just upgrade the existing structure for better stormwater management and to provide pedestrian and bicycle accessibility? And then the other option would be, you know, what's the cost associated with opening it to vehicular traffic again? And there might be a subset within that of, is there somewhere in between a lesser standard that could be done at a lesser cost just to provide emergency access or provide better turnaround facilities for school buses and trash trucks that have to access the road?
A wise man once said here, maybe 10 years ago in the township, that Worcester Day of Reckoning may be coming regarding our roads and our infrastructure. We kept, you know, no sewer and these things have, we kept them out. We kept the sidewalks out. We kept a lot of things the way they were, and this may come back to haunt us. I addressed the water situation, and we become more aware of stormwater management with the big storms we've had in the past 2 or 3 years. And I was surprised to find out that a lot of the water from up around Methacton High School on Germantown Pike side ends up back in that creek there through the Methacton Avenue in that area. It all drains down to that pond on by Crebo Mill Road that broke during the rainstorm, and it flooded the whole area out. So there's an awful lot of water that's collected from that area of Worcester that makes its way into that small little pipe at the bottom of Marybrook Road. And that water is forced there under the bridge, and it carries a lot of trees and debris with it, much like every other water inlet in the township. And that's a concern. We're trying to fix the problem rather than the water backing up all the way through the township. And that's a key to it, because that's one of the last steps before it hits down over to Evansburg Park. You know, if we can make it way over there, then, you know, it's out of our township across the road over the Skipack. But when we have these large storms, that becomes a lake, that whole area over there, and the residents are upset. And then even in the wintertime, there's not proper drainage, and it just floods and ices and becomes a ponding effect as well. So it's a safety hazard with the school buses around there. That's one of the real issues we got involved with it. The school buses were going through the water there that were 2 or 3 feet deep during a school day, which probably not the best thing. There's no other way to get around there. So the buses are coming down the hill, and not that they're floating through it, but once again, we know when standing water's there or moving water's there, it's really a concern. So it was the safety of the school district that prompts us to look into this situation as well. So.
You know, and based on the level of speed you want to move with this, you know, maybe what we do is for your budget next year, develop some scope and budget for what it would take for us to do a little more detailed engineering evaluation of everything, maybe during the fall, we do some kind of survey of the residents.
Yeah, I mean, we think it's a multi-step process. I mean, Jim came tonight, so we don't want to tell him we're breaking ground on next Monday. You know, we're not quite there yet in terms of that. But we'd also like to make some progress with it to at least understand practicality in terms of that. So a couple more questions sort of on the money side of it. Obviously, earlier this year, I lose track of the time, but, you know, at a federal level, we had an infrastructure bill that passed for $1.1 trillion, and at some point, that money is going to start dispersing. You know, I think it started in every road I travel is presently under significant construction. I mean, do some of those dollars, are they going to align to projects like this? I mean, is it still too early to tell? I mean,
It's still a little too early to tell. Some of the programs are starting to roll out now from the federal infrastructure bill, and we're monitoring those to see how they might apply to different projects that our municipal clients want to do. So, you know, we're going to continue to do that in general and advise the township. And if we know this is something, you know, the township wants to consider moving forward, we can certainly have this on the list to try and identify what new programs are coming out from the federal bill that this could apply to.
Another interesting point from the grants out there and the infrastructure that, you know, with the stormwater management, with these floods and things, maybe there's something we can apply for that, for the water problems that it causes in the neighborhood from the stormwater management area. In conjunction with that, we have to look at, I know that was one of the roads we talked about getting paved, and if some people have said it's nothing more than a private driveway, when you have something that runs 800 to 1,000 feet in length, I'm not sure the whole length of it, but most residents in the township don't have access to it. So it's really the only people on that road
right.
that have access to it. By opening the road up, we can more justify putting that on the list of paving and spending taxpayers' money to fix the road.
Right.
Rather, it's, you know, it's a dedicated township road, but most residents in the township don't use it. So it's one of those little sticking points we run into sometimes with certain pieces of property.
That's fair enough. So, Chad, is it a reasonable ask that you'd be able to sort of put something together to say, hey, this is what we could do to sort of get things in front of you in terms of, again, as you said, not just simply putting a cost index to an old piece of paper, but, you know, getting out in the area again and spending a little time looking at it and making some recommendations based on that and trying to align some dollars to that. Because as Steve said, it's, you know, if you don't ever start, you know, 6 months from now, we're just having another meeting to talk about the things we talked about 6 months ago. So I think there's some value in at least getting a couple of steps that can get put in place to see what type of practicality these things have, and then certainly getting them sort of into the budget as addendums and items that we start planning for as well. I mean, I wouldn't envision that to be dollars in 2022 that would go other than maybe, you know, some fees and different things. But, you know, once you start, you blink and it's 23 and then it's 24, and, you know, it's just a never-ending cycle in terms of that.
We can definitely put something together for you, and like I said, we can sort of set it up as like a menu of options
Yep.
for the board to consider as you move forward.
That sounds good. So we have a few minutes on it. Excuse me. I do see a couple people in the audience who potentially are just here for this issue. So if anybody has any public comment or questions that they want to come up and just sort of pose and present on this particular topic, I think we have time to do that if anybody does. But sort of our plan is help the engineers sort of get back out there and start pulling together, as Steve said, a fact-finding mission to sort of see, here's what you have, here's what you might want to consider doing, here are some of the ways you might go about doing that so that we can start to sort of itemize sort of some kind of a plan there. But certainly if there are some specific questions or concerns that somebody wants to share at this time, I'm certainly open to that. Okay. You want to come chat, Jim? That would be great. Yep.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, well, it could be. I mean, at this point, nobody's writing a check, but if we don't put a number on a piece of paper, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to eliminate more than anything, Jim, is the anecdotal discussion of we would never do it because it's north of this or north of that, and, people just grab mystery numbers. At least if you have the number, you say, okay, well, that's too much, we're not gonna do it, but you'd wanna have whatever the real number is. Yeah. Sure, nope. Fair enough.
Jim, I'll ask you a question with your vast municipal experience. The use of, you certainly still probably go to Avalon, I guess, the use of golf carts down there and those road vehicles that I guess you have to go 25 miles an hour. In- Walking, right? Well, I'm just wondering that in Worcester, I guess go to Mr. Ryan, are they permitted in Worcester? Golf carts that go, roadworthy golf carts, I guess.
Yeah.
You have to, usually license, once again, there are more people in that area that have a little more land and things. Is that something, I'm asking you for all the township you represent? You haven't run in a township municipality you represent, you haven't run into that yet? No one's asked yet. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Joe?
My only request would be before you start, you said my name, but you're not here.
I have swimmer's ear, I guess.
So the bottom line is, if, before you go through the engineering part, as you said in '08, it was one part. Things have changed since '08. And some of those might be your legal responsibility to keep road closed. And I think somebody should look at, their attorney to look to see if that road can be open, if a park can even be put there. Maybe there's state law that requires you not to make a park there. Maybe there is other issues, but a lot of legal issues have come up over the time, and I think before you go forward to say we want a park, we want all family and everything else, I think you should look at it and have your attorney.
I think it's the question, we're not sure of the land around. There's a lot of open space in that area, right, but on the one side of the bridge, on this side, away from the high school. The other side is pretty much homes that border it, except the Moran property where it's preserved ground. But on the other side, when you come down the road, Mr. Harris lives on the right-hand side, but the left-hand side, there's a large area there that I think the township had talked a number of years ago. It's picturesque, and it'd be a nice place to put some tables there and chairs, but we have to do a a survey to see who, right.
Yep. Yeah, we would certainly want to check that, Joe. Thank you. I appreciate your comments. Anybody else? Yeah, come forward. If you're going to speak, we do ask that you come sign our sheet so we get your name correct, and then just speak into the mic so that it gets picked up for the recording. I'm going to say yes, because I have a little bit of time, as long as you're, that'll be fine. That's fine. And your name? Okay. Thank you, Emily. You're very welcome. We know who you are because you've been to past meetings, Joe.
I thought maybe since you retired, you forgot how to write your name. I'm not sure. Jim may charge us for it, you won't. I know that.
Okay. So does anybody else want to make a comment on the Kriebel Mill item? If you want to make a public comment, we'll be there in just a minute. But so I think we're good on Kriebel Mill for now, Chad. Certainly appreciate you spending a few minutes on that. So you're officially off the hook. In terms of our meeting, does anybody have any other business they want to bring up for our work session tonight? Okay. Now we're at public comment. So if you have any public comment, anyone want to come and give public comment?
Michelle, can you, before you leave, can you sign in? Michelle, can you talk into the mic and just put a little sit closer and pull it closer? Thank you.
It should be on. Do you
green
see a
button
green
down?
light? Okay, you just need to, got to lean in tight. And I think you translated that just fine. Thank you, Michelle. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board for our work session tonight? Seeing none, then motion to adjourn.